Okay, it now being 7:05, we will call the January 10th, 2019 meeting of the Concord Finance Committee to order. And I would remind you all that we are being recorded and broadcast live. Good evening, all. Fellow members of the committee and esteemed visitors. So we will launch right into our agenda, and the first item being the approval of minutes. We have from Mrs. Techley, our esteemed scribe, the minutes for our meeting on December 20th. Does anyone have comments on these minutes? I know I have one minor comment. Anyone else have anything? All right. So my comment is on page 3 of the minutes, in this first long paragraph, about 8 lines from the bottom, there's a line that begins, Mr. Banfield. Mr. Banfield expressed concern that the FC is viewed as a conservative group, which others, and my correction is, I would put the phrase blow off in quotation marks. That's it from me.
That's a generation minutes for that collection.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, unanimously approved. Good. So, second on our agenda, review of the 2019 annual town meeting warrant. But we're also going to hear a presentation on the PEG budget. And given that we have a visitor here to do that, I would like to take that first. So, Ms. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Carby, I appreciate that. And thank you, Committee, for allowing me some time. This is, my name is Carlin Reed. I'm the chair of the PEG Access Advisory Committee, also known as the PAC.
And your address is?
My address is, I feel like it's 22 Monument Square, but first of all, but it's actually 83 Wits End, Concord, Massachusetts. I'm here acting as the chair of the PAC, and I wanted to let you know that we started forming a subcommittee to look at the budget for the PEG Access Fund because it's within our charge to some degree, but then I realized that's also FinCom's charge. So what I wanted to do today is to come and see what your process is for reviewing the PEG Access Fund now that it's a town department as of October of last year. This is a change. In the past, it was run by CCTV, a nonprofit corporation, but as of October of last year, it became a town department, which means now there's town oversight. And as the chair of the PAC, which is the Citizen Advisory Committee, we have been looking at various aspects of and helping this department get off the ground. And one part that we're turning our attention now, because there's a warrant article, is the PEG Access Fund. So I have presented a very rudimentary chart of what the PEG Access Fund is. It's contained in your packet. It's this chart that is black with green bars. And you can tell the level of my expertise with Excel because I actually did this and I hope I did it correctly. Like I said, very simple. But it is based on information that I've gleaned on the fund from the finance department as well as previous town reports. This is just from the past year. So what we're looking at here is, and what the warrant article will be. The warrant article, I think it'll be number 43 based on the chart that I see as a handout here. I think it'll be for $500,000. Which reflects roughly about $400,000 that we get every year from Comcast from cable subscriber fees, not tax dollars, but cable subscriber fees. In addition to that $500,000 will be another $100,000 drawn from this fund, the PEG Access Fund, which at the time that we acquired it, the town acquired it from CCTV, was about $1 million. It has grown up a little bit above that, but not much. You can see they're made of a couple different components, at least the way the town registers it, an operations fund, capital fund, and undesignated fund. I was just kind of curious what type of process you folks had thought about following to review the pay access fund now that it's a town department. If you haven't, I can give you some suggestions and some data.
Excuse me, I am not aware of any process. We certainly haven't had any discussion on this. So unless anyone else recollects something I don't, we would welcome your suggestions.
Good. Well, what I had tentatively wanted to do is, with the small 3-person subcommittee we have on the PEG budget, we're going to be meeting in February and in early March, looking at the PEG fund, the expenses, the revenues, the forecast going forward. The budget subcommittee will give a recommendation to the full PAC on March 20th. And after that, the full PAC will make its vote on whether to support the article or whatever we're going to be doing to that. Now, this hearing for this PEG fund will occur on March 11th as part of the enterprise funds. It'll probably be at the tail end. If it isn't part of the consent agenda, I don't know what's going to happen, but that's where it's segmented right now for consideration. My goal is to get an answer to you folks well before your March 11th, so you have an idea of if there's a problem, that we let you know well in advance of that. And also have the dialogue go both ways. If you have questions about what's going on, what are these numbers about, if you care, that we give the information to you in as easy a format as possible and as quickly as possible. So that's my intent, is to work with you guys, basically.
Okay. I don't know when in the process the consent agenda is made final. Anita, do you know?
Just prior to the publication of the Finance Committee report, the moderator, after the hearings are done,
Okay.
the moderator gives that list and includes it in the FinCom report.
Right.
So it would be sometime in early March.
So not having seen your budget or the information you're going to present, I can't even guess whether you would be on the consent calendar or subject to discussion. So
Some of what drives being on the consent calendar is a lack of public interest at hearings. So if no one steps up, no questions are answered, no engagement with the community seems to be occurring at the hearings, then things typically do.
when you say lack of controversy rather than lack of interest,
Sorry. A lack of non-controversial.
Yeah.
How about that?
In the past, this particular type of article has always been on the consent agenda, because you need to have the money to run the cameras that are videotaping it, for example. That's the whole process. So what we're doing is just making sure everything is in order, and if there's a problem, we anticipate looking at it before the hearings. But at this stage, I don't see concerns rising at the moment. So, anyway, that was the coordination effort that I wanted to reach out. If there are any questions, feel free to get a hold of me. If there is anything else, I'll answer it now. Otherwise, I'll go back and sit in the pews.
I just have one quick question.
Yes.
With the advent of our own internet service that we're providing, and I assume that means less people are using Comcast, have we seen the reimbursement from Comcast going down? And do you see that as any concern and jeopardy to the PEG?
I just finished up the PAC's report for the town report, and that was one of the data points that we looked at. The subscribership rate and the total dollar revenues. And you'd think they would be parallel, but they're not, because Comcast is raising its fees. So, and you'll see in the report that for the last 3 years, the actual dollar amount that Comcast has generated that have come into PEG have gone up slightly, even though the number of subscribers have gone down, because Comcast raises its rates, because it's one of their lines of business. They want to make a profit too. Now, what will happen going forward, I don't know. That's part of what I want my committee to do, is to do a little bit of our simplistic level of forecasting, making sure it remains a financially viable process, so that it does not become a tax burden. Because right now it comes out of cable subscriber fees, not the tax bills. So that's my goal, is to keep it funded by cable subscriber fees for as long as possible.
So we would probably want to know if that 4.8% of Comcast revenues will remain at that level or
It
not.
will contractually until 2024, because that's when the 10-year franchise agreement expires. in 2021, we'll start the negotiation process again with Comcast, and that's when we start talking about to see if 4.8 is adequate for what we want to do, or if we need to change it or do something differently. And I definitely intend to keep this committee apprised. Anything else?
It's actually warrant Article 16, although it's listed on this sheet as 43.
There
It's
are two
actually
different
number
ways.
16.
At the select board meeting, it was listed as number 16 and number 43. So I point out you only move it once, and I encourage the select board to move it towards the end with the other enterprise one. So I don't know what the chairman sitting behind me will do, but I suspect it'll be part of the enterprise fund segment and will be heard on the 11th as well.
He was trying to hide it from us, but we found it.
Hey, you had it twice, it was great. But I just wanted to know that in your packet, if you actually look at the wording, the total dollar amount is 500,000, but the two components don't add up to 500,000.
We noticed that, yes.
So I pointed that out to Mr. Whalen, and I'm sure he'll make that correction. But I've been assured that the total amount at this point is 500,000. We'll find out on the 14th what the select board actually approves. Anything else? Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, moving on to the balance of the warrant. I believe you all have a sheet which indicates when the hearings will be held on each warrant article that's going to be dealt with at a hearing. And I see the finance director approaching the microphone.
He's getting ready.
Would you, are you there just to answer questions, or would you like to, you have something to say at this point?
Sure, I always have something to say. So the warrant that you have is a draft. I'm sure you can tell that it is in draft form. There was a meeting yesterday with the moderator, the chair of the select board, the town clerk, town council. We went through the draft. There have been some changes. The intent is that the select board will be voting on the warrant on Monday night. So as you mentioned, you may have seen another version with it in a different order. The articles aren't necessarily going to stay in this order, but the sheet that I prepared, the cover sheet, is based on the document that you're looking at. So I thought this evening really would be a good opportunity to go through the articles and decide if in your meetings this month, prior to the public hearings, if you would like to invite anybody to come in to give you a preview of the articles. You do have the town manager scheduled for next week and the superintendent for the week after that, but you certainly have an opportunity to invite anybody else to come in for those hearings as well.
Okay. What would someone, without my referring to the warrant, which article number is the article on the feasibility study, so-called, for the middle school?
14.
14? Okay. So regarding that item, the school committee has written to the finance committee requesting some input on the process that they intend to follow. And I would propose that we invite the chair, at least, of the Concord School Committee to join us at one of the meetings. And I would guess that earlier rather than later would be helpful. So the next meeting, the meeting on the 17th, would be good, assuming she is available to do that. All right, so why don't we then move through these one at a time and talk about who we would like to assign to follow each particular article and present where appropriate. So let's see, first one, I think, where we really need to do that. I can't remember from past years whether I don't recall that we've ever issued any sort of opinion on the ratification of personnel board classification actions.
Something I just get on the consent calendar.
I'm sorry?
So those often get on the consent calendar.
It very well may be.
So my question on Article 4 was, are there no financial implications of modifying or creating new positions? And is that the question we should be asking? I mean, for example, at the select board meeting the other night, I learned that the assistant town manager has been promoted to the deputy town manager. And then looking through the classifications, that's a different classification, implying that there could be financial implications to many of these changes. But there's nothing listed here to that effect.
So would you want to hear from somebody from the personnel board? Is that the right way to look at it? Are there financial implications from these modifications and creations of positions? And if so, shouldn't the finance committee? Yeah, I guess whether there are financial implications has to do with what changes have been made.
Right.
And I, for one, couldn't tell you whether there has always been a position of deputy town manager.
Well, so I used that one example. That I happen to know is new because you told us it was.
But wouldn't that depend on, I mean, how far into the weeds do we want to get on the town manager's budget?
Well, no, not at all. That's my question. Well, do we need to know the financial implications of all of these changes? That's my
I think that
question.
they're incorporated in the town manager's
Right.
operating budget that includes a salary increase component
I
that
see.
we are.
So it's already in his budget?
Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, that answers the question, yeah.
Okay.
So,
So the first one here that would likely not be on the consent calendar would be Article 6, is that correct?
that looks.
Yes. So,
I've never seen the town budget. I said I've never seen the town budget ever be on the consent calendar.
right, exactly. So is there someone who would like to present for the Finance Committee on the town budget?
Is this at the public hearing? Are you talking about the public hearing? Are you talking about the public hearing?
Well, at the public hearing and at the annual town meeting, right. So,
Are we voting, are we supporting the town budget or are we recommending no action?
This feels like we're a little premature.
Yeah.
We need to go through the hearing process, I think, Tom, before we decide, what kind of a position and therefore what sort of statement would be either required or not required. And then people might have an inclination or disinclination to volunteer to speak to whatever our position is. I just feel like we're a little cart before the horse.
okay.
To do that.
May I give you some good news on Article 6?
Yes.
Always in the market for good news.
So the town manager's budget is now in conformance with the guideline.
That's it.
Well, could you follow up with some explanation
So
of how that came about?
The biggest thing was the settlement of the police contract, and I think I mentioned that before. It was in the process of being settled, and we finally processed all of the payments as a result of that. And so that was the biggest issue. We did make some cutbacks in the operating capital, but we're still meeting the guideline. So those were probably the two biggest items. So we were able to reduce the salary reserve in the budget because we knew what the contract settled for, and then an adjustment in the capital.
So, Carrie, what had been the gap?
The gap, I feel there's been so many different versions. I think
Right.
every day there's a different version. It was a little over $100,000. It might have been $120,000 the last time that you saw that.
there had been some discussion at the select board meeting about 70 positions, and that apparently is not going, like the firefighters to man the ambulance and an IT person. There were numerous
Right.
additional.
Those positions are still within the budget.
They're still within, okay, they're in the budget, but we're within the guideline.
Yeah. And with those positions, when we had the $120,000 gap or so, those positions were still in the budget at that point in time. There were 2 parks positions, one was removed.
Okay.
So
There-
wait, 4 firefighters, so are in the budget?
The way that it was proposed
Which
with
is a very
the,
small
That was at
portion.
39.
Yeah. With another group funding part of it, right, isn't there?
Yes.
yes,
There's a-
and phased, it would be
Right.
phased
So
over
going
time.
forward,
Right.
eventually we will end up paying.
Right, the full load is not in.
No.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right.
We're drawing down the
News.
news fund.
Right.
News, right.
So Carrie, what had the gap been in percentage terms? The town manager's budget had been 5.22%, is that what?
I think the last version that you saw was 4.99,
4.99?
and your guideline is
4.13.
is it 4.13?
But that's what but this could be fine too.
I think it was 4.42 was the final, 4.13 was the preliminary.
Okay.
So there was about a 0.5%
Okay.
gap.
All right. Well, that is good news.
Well, it's good news, but we've got a lot of headcount that we're going to be thankful for a long time.
The way they say they net it, Tom, right, was to use funds from somewhere else, and it's not fully loaded, right? So, you know, the same discussion that we had around what's the real cost of those firefighters, it's still.
Right.
Still that.
They're not showing the real cost.
Sorry, so not fully loaded with benefits?
No, they're not
No,
fully loaded even
right.
salary.
Even with
No,
salary.
Even with salary.
We're
So
withdrawing funds from a sustainability, from a fund that was put up in the news.
Actually, this budget will have them at 89,000 for 4 firefighters, when just the salary alone for 4 is about a little over 300,000. So we're covering a very
Next year,
small
you're gonna get
portion
hit.
of.
Right. And this will become clearer when we have the 5-year projection come out. It will show that increase in subsequent years, leading to the, I think we don't see the full cost of those firefighters until the 4th year.
Right, the 4th.
Right. Okay.
Well, I understand the FTEs fall in the guideline budget, and the benefits, I guess, fall in the non-guideline part of the budget, but it still all adds up.
So
You
how
have
did,
good news?
Let's keep the good news coming. What else have you got?
that's the rest of our process here.
What's the rest of our process for?
Well, I'm wondering how we want to approach the remaining warrant articles. Is there something we need to do one by one, or do we need to just look at
I
them?
think it would probably be somewhat helpful to talk about to just have a chat about the middle school feasibility study and the implications that has for our, for the town.
Right, so I think just before you arrived, I mentioned that we're going to be inviting.
I don't know if you didn't mention that.
Okay.
So we can defer that and have that conversation then. But that, to me, is the most significant thing in front of us right now.
Right.
Is the implications of that level. I'm,
There's also the CCRSD capital projects, which is
the parking lot and exactly.
And I'd like to talk about the affordable
So
housing things.
I guess my point, Tom, at this juncture, is that, lacking the hearing forum and feedback from the public, that we would get through that process. I feel like we can probably defer in January most of the conversation about this, unless there are specific things that we know we want to get into a little more detail on, such as talking about the middle school,
Right.
et cetera. I just feel as though we'll be able to have more meaningful conversations about these articles after the hearing process, unless there's something that we feel we want to invite someone in, or we want to get on top of it. We want to get on top of it now.
Well,
rather than wait.
Why don't we quickly run through the whole warrant?
Yeah, that's
and
fine.
if people have items that they want to call out for comment,
Yeah, there you
we'll go ahead.
That's good.
So we've discussed Article 6.
So we're working off two different article numbers
I
here.
think we should go with this one.
That's
Carrie,
different
this
from
is-
Shorthand version or the longhand version?
Well, either one, but they're different.
They are different, I know.
But this is the
You know,
latest. Is that
I
fair?
guess we'll
It
capital
is.
projects is
I was
separate.
working from the more recent draft when I put this together.
Okay.
Just to keep.
Just as long as we're talking about the same one, that's fine.
Sure.
Yeah.
I would suggest for more thorough description
Yeah.
that we operate off the long form.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
And so
Okay.
we're, Article 6 is use of free cash. Anyone have any desire to comment or question? Article 7, we talked about town budget.
I'm sorry, could you go back to 6, what did you say about free cash, we're going to take how much?
$1 million.
Million? And then what will that bring our free cash balance down to as a percent?
9.7 or something?
Well, we're still in the process of getting free cash certified. We expect it to be certified at about 11.6 million, so we're still going to be around that 10%, maybe slightly over.
A little bit over 10. If we apportioned $1 million back to the general fund.
And if it's certified at what we expect it to be certified.
Good, thank you.
Given the place where we are right now, are there any open accounts that could be used to mitigate future debt that we might incur for the middle school? We're not going to be able to not build a middle school. The question is, are we going to wait for MSBA, or whatever? I feel as though we ought to be putting money into a stabilization fund. So if we're over 10%, if we can fund a stabilization fund, that if there's one that's open,
You know what might be useful, since several of us have attended the school committee meetings, but many haven't. I think it would be useful if you would summarize where we are.
Okay, yeah, I'll do the best I can. I have some notes. All right. So the school committee meeting, which was 2 days ago, was a follow-up to their prior vote to move forward with this article that we have before us, which is that they would like to engage with feasibility study. So their goal is to engage with the community. They listed at least 30 individual organizations, from Council on Aging to every youth sports group they could imagine, to the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, to really just about anybody you can think of, that they want to reach out to and talk to about their intentions, which is really, they're hoping to gather feedback, but to me, this just feels like a charm offensive. It's more of a marketing effort. That's my personal opinion, but, it is what it
So,
is.
Dean, maybe even before that,
Yeah.
I think as I understood it, it's their intention to move ahead with a plan, in the planning process
Yes.
for a new middle school
Yes.
without MSBA
That's correct.
help.
So, yes,
And describing that is the main purpose of these
right.
public meetings.
So the MSBA declined to invite them into the MSBA partnership this year. They keep applying. This is the second year they've applied. It's the second time they've not been invited in to partner with Why? Because there are other schools apparently which are in worse shape than our middle school. And that doesn't surprise me. I'm sure there are towns who have much fewer resources than we.
How long does it usually take? You know, I mean, how many times do you have to apply?
Well, that's a great question. I think it took us a couple of tries to get the high school approved. I don't think it was 3, it might have been 2, I've forgotten. We sort of threw up our hands and built Willard on our own dime. Did not get participation from the MSBA to build Willard, because we just, and to some degree that was done because of the community sense of inequity. You have 2 brand new elementaries and this other one is not, and at some point you have to address it because a third of your students are going to an older building.
Yeah, I don't think that we apply for MSBA for Willard.
At all.
Because MSBA had rebuilt Willard 10 years earlier.
Oh,
So they weren't eligible.
They weren't even eligible.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's very much a roll the dice situation. It has a lot to do with the other communities in the state who have need and the amount of funding that the MSBA have for any given year. And our need does not seem to rise to the level that other communities may have been able to demonstrate. So I think that's the best I can do to describe it. And we were not, this is the second year we've applied, and this is the second year we've declined. So the main thing that you do once the MSBA agrees to partner with you is you conduct what's formally called a feasibility study. It's a very expensive undertaking. The feasibility study leads to schematic designs of a building, something that you would actually want to build. It's not plans that you could actually take out and bid, but it gets you a design, it gets you some nice drawings, I'm sure, you get pretty far along in your process of architecting and understanding what your building is going to be. They did a study 3 years ago now, 2.5 years ago now, to understand, what state those buildings are in and get some idea of rebuild costs versus build new costs, that kind of thing. They spent $19,500 on that study. The feasibility study that they're anticipating here in this warrant article is $1.5 million. It's 2 orders of magnitude more than the money they spent to understand the conditions of those buildings and some rough sense of what the options are. So this is a very serious piece of work that gets you to the point of having a building design in hand that you can then send to an architect and say, I need working drawings that can be bid, but doesn't include those. So it's a big deal. Now, not partnering with the MSBA means you're taking this step and you're doing it on your own without them looking over your shoulder. And if you keep applying to the MSBA, they may say, oh, you really do need a new building, but the work you just did, we weren't working with you on that. You need to revise it. You may need to throw it away, or you may need to seriously revise it because we need to be, involved. So some of this is a bet, which might involve tossing some of the work if the MSBA comes back and partners with us.
Dean, is that why the other night you didn't want to call this a feasibility study?
A feasibility study, in my view, it just seemed like $1.5 million to figure out whether, something's feasible or not is a lot of money. I just couldn't figure out why we were calling it that. But apparently that's a formal term, but it doesn't describe it well to the public. The public doesn't view, feasibility in my view is, can we do it, can't we do it? But what this actually gets you is, all the way down the design process to the point where you have a building that you would love to now draw up and build. So it's a lot, to me, more than feasibility. You're going pretty far down the road of designing your building.
Can you help me understand how this integrates with Phil's idea about, remember you had the idea of establishing a committee of people or
Building committee.
Permanent
That-
buildings.
That is in process. The select board, it's on the select board. And we've already had several, it's been discussed several times in the select board. So I suspect that would be something to be implemented in the next 6 months. Tom is not exact, I think so.
I think that's correct. I think the idea will be, depending on what happens, putting together some type of program that we would have, there would be input in terms of skilled people, so it wouldn't be the school committee doing all of it. There would be also a great deal of experienced expertise that would come to bear on the project.
So Mayor, if it comes into effect as
Yeah.
I proposed it, that committee would actually be in charge of the building with input and possibly representation, depending on what model they adopt from the school committee. So you'd have a 5-member permanent building committee and 2 members from the school.
So they would be more oversight of the actual building, not the design. So their work doesn't overlap with the
Yes, no.
feasibility study.
There's a
Or
big-
does it?
really,
That's
it
what I'm,
should.
that's
So
what I'm
let's,
trying to-
let's get to a point of this.
Yeah.
A big point that the school board spent a lot of time working through is how does the educational program that we want to deliver for a middle school, how does that fit with the physical architecture that we want to build? So they call this visioning. We want to have our, we want to have our dream educational platform, and we need a building to fit the way we want to teach. So, some of this makes me a little nervous that there's no fit there between a model school and this process, because we're going to design something that fits exactly the way we want to lay it out to optimize our teaching environment as we see it. So they're going to be undertaking over the next 2 months an exercise in, sort of articulating their vision for how they would love to teach, and how a building can support that. And so they're going to do this visioning. Bob, correct me if I'm wrong. I think I've got the words that you're using. So that's their next process. Is this engagement? They have a committee that they're recharging that was established for other purposes 2 years ago or so.
17.
Yeah, 2017, and they're going to sort of turn the crank and fire that committee back up. It was sort of dormant, but it was never disbanded. So they're going to recharge it with a revised charge and have them work through some of this visioning and engagement with the community. So that's another piece of that puzzle is, okay, what do we want this building to be? But that's not work that the $1.5 million gets us. That's work that the community and the educators and that we're doing. That's not what this is, so.
Just to clarify the question.
Yeah.
So if I understand this correctly, this is the intention here is to have something, if we as a town wanted to pursue this independent of any type of subsidy we would receive from the state, we would be in a position to actually do that.
That's right. Or if we apply next year, you hear every December whether or not you're invited into the partnership with the MSBA.
Sure.
So if we were to do this work and get to next December and we have a design and we're kind of ready to go, and they say, yeah, we do see that your building is literally critically ill and needs to be replaced. We say, well, look, boom, here it is. Let's go. Let's keep going.
But your point is, they could look at those plans and say, we would love to fund this,
But
Yeah.
but there's something wrong with these
Yeah,
plans.
that is something of a, we're making a little bit of a bet there. We are. It could just be you need to do a revision, or it could be we want to review it, and then they come back and go, yeah, you guys did a great job, then go for it. But that's unlikely. Let's just say I assume that's unlikely. So who knows?
But I'm also hearing the school that they're envisioning, it would be a unique one-of-a-kind school.
Well-
It kind of precludes using a model school.
Well,
Is that true?
there's a great question. And Tom and I had the great fortune to sit next to a person who was a professional architect at the last school committee meeting. And I turned to her at one point and I said,
Who designed schools?
she designs schools, what she does.
Yep.
And she has kids in pre-K and first grade or something. And so she's obviously got an interest of what's this going to look like when my kid's ready to hit that level. And what I turned to her and I said, how does this whole vision quest or whatever, how does this all fit with the idea of a model school? And she says, what you do is you take the model school and you customize it. But at least you've started with a baseline, which has been bid out multiple times, that contractors are comfortable, understanding how to bid.
Okay.
And you get a lot of the efficiencies, but you can still say, I want this pod over here, or I want this, conference room over there, whatever.
Does a model school require a feasibility study?
There's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
I think they do. I think generally, the MSBA requires a feasibility study once they agree to work with you. So that's a requirement. So there has to be a feasibility study with capital F and S, let's say next December. Now, we could say, well, we have this existing feasibility study, it wasn't done under your rules, but we'd like to use as much of this as you'll accept.
Right.
And the school is hoping that they'll use most of it. But it is a requirement that you start over with a feasibility study.
Yeah, I think to a degree, the whole feasibility step helps a town establish need. Do we need a new building? Can we get by with a expansion and a major renovation? What are the variables, and how do we solve the multivariate equation? And the MSBA wants to partner in that so that they get the most cost-effective solution for your community. And if everybody in the town goes, well, we really need a new building, and the MSBA says, no, you know what you need is a nice new wing over here, and renovate these other pieces, and you're good to go. That's what they will approve. So I think that having it on board while you're doing this process helps guide the whole thing. Now, Peter can weigh in here. You've been down this road.
I'm just trying to remember where we were when we went off of this.
Road, yeah, exactly. So just, I have two more comments about the meeting, and it is fundamentally the whole meeting was spent planning how they will engage with the community. They're going to have weekly tours to show you how run down the building is. They're going to, every Saturday you can go and see Peabody or see Sanborn. They're both going to be open for weekly tours, so they can communicate the level of concern and need. They're going to have coffees. They're going to have public forums. There's a whole calendar of these that has been established, and there are going to be individual school committee members that are going to lead all of those. So that's kind of the.
And for starters, we're going to have the chair visit us next.
Yes, Tom. Tom's got the.
So just so you understand, the reason why they want to do this now is because they're concerned that they're going to get turned down again.
Microphone closer to Phil.
They want to do this independent feasibility study now because they're concerned they're going to get turned down again next December, and they want to have something ready to go. So if the decision is we want to build this school on our own, we don't lose a year by waiting to find out what the MSBA does. On the other hand, we're probably going to have to pay for 2 feasibility studies. So it's, we don't know how much more the second one would be, but it could be another $1.5 million.
The question that is at the top of mind for the school committee, which is they have a long list of how their presentation was going to lay out, how everything was going to be communicated to the community. The very final point on that list, in all caps, was why now? And they need to answer that question, and they need to have a succinct reason why that building that worked last year and worked for the last 30 won't work for 2 or 3 or 5 more years. They need to answer that question, why now? And they know that, and that's one of the things we're going to work on.
They're anticipating everybody saying, why shouldn't we just wait another year and apply again and see what happens?
They have to answer to that question,
Yeah.
yes. So,
Well, even beyond the feasibility, having a redundant study done, what percentage of financing would we, or funding would we get from this agency that we might forego?
40.
Well, it
40.
depends on whether you use a model school or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a higher
It's big money.
percentage if you use a
Okay.
model school.
So if we concluded, if they did a feasibility study and everybody likes the building, they would come back in a year or 2 years and say, here's the number, we want to build it with or without the money from the state.
See that, yeah,
That's the path they're on, right?
40% presumes a model school.
Right.
We didn't use a model school for the high school, and we got 26%. So, it'd be less if we don't.
but it's still real money. I mean, this is not, you know,
Yeah.
it's right, it's easy. That's right. So,
Okay,
so the, yeah, that's the summary. I have, one or two, the other note is that the CPS budget remains $145,025 over our guideline. That's the other note.
Was that for the leasing the computers?
It's just, they want, what are we at, 2.9, some kind of 99 number? They were at 2.99, we were at 2.93, I've forgotten what the exact percentage numbers are.
But I thought the difference was they were going to,
They had different
Okay.
variables
We'll talk
that
about
they
it
were
later.
working with.
Sorry.
It's not the same variables that they have in high school, which were three obvious ones, which was OPEB and buy, lease buy computer. That was a high school question, lease buy computers is a high school option. This is CPS.
Was there any discussion, so on the high school, there had been a letter from the Carlisle Finance Committee, I think, talking about the increase and how much of the allocation they would have to bear, and there was some back and forth on that. Is there any more conversation on that? Is Carlisle happy now with their
No.
allocation? Okay, I didn't think they would be, yeah.
not after we finish the guideline
Yeah.
hearings.
I have a question. Does the school committee, I've been hearing in the Globe that the Baker administration is looking at reallocating money to the towns for schools. You read about that?
I've heard that.
Have you heard that, Carrie? That it's been in the Globe a few times, and there's talk about reallocating money to schools based on maybe putting more money towards urban schools or poor performing schools. And I'm wondering, is the school committee on top of that, or is the school superintendent on top of that? And is there any risk to us as far as the money that we would get?
So I asked them that question on Tuesday night.
Oh, you did,
Yeah.
great. And what did you
And actually, I just learned that they are talking about rejigging the MSBA funding formula, and it's expected to be fully implemented in 4 to 7 years. So
Wait,
it's,
but that's for building.
that's for building, yes.
Okay, what about the
Chapter
yearly,
70.
the chapter 70?
Well, that I'm not sure.
Okay, because
Yeah.
that's what I.
No, I'm sorry, I was referring solely to the
Yeah, no,
MSBA.
I thought, they're talking about the chapter 70 money.
Okay.
Anyway, there's no, you don't have any more information than I have.
I don't, the governor's budget, I think, is coming out on I think it's the 23rd, so we'll know soon enough.
There's nothing on the website yet on that.
Okay. No, there's just been a lot in the Globe about it lately, so I was wondering if we.
We're not a community that receives a lot of money in terms of Chapter 78, so.
Okay.
And we get about $3.5 million. That's not a lot in comparison to what other communities receive.
Okay. Thank you.
Not inconsiderable, however. All right. Moving along here. Concord Public Schools capital projects. Which one do you want? Oh, it's 10. Pardon me, it's 10. In the long form, it's Article 10.
That is the standard number, $900,000. That's for the last few years.
Where do you see that, Chris?
It's
in the
in
words.
it's in
It's
text,
not, it's in
Yeah,
text,
it's in
it's
text.
spelled out.
Oh, okay, because I'm looking for a number. But thanks.
right?
So is this a placeholder for the time being? Or is this
I
really?
do think that they have a list, some of which does relate to the Peabody and Sanborn buildings, but I don't know what the specifics of the list are.
Yeah,
Is this
they,
where the
It was
phone
included
system
in-
would go?
Yeah, this is
it
where
was in
like-
last
It was
month's,
in the December 20th.
yeah.
Yeah.
We did have it, and they do have a plan for spending that $900,000 for next year. So that is available.
So any further questions on that? All right, we've run out the middle school feasibility study, which is, and now we're to Article 12, CCHS budget. Any question or discussion on that?
That is in the guidelines.
That's in the guideline that we use.
What?
I think that meets the guideline.
Yeah.
Revolving funds, that's probably going to be,
Wait a minute, go to 13.
Capital projects, that's the parking lot
right.
and the repaving.
Thank you.
effort.
So, I think it may be worth asking about that,
it's what, Phil?
about that $2 million for the parking. I'm sorry. I think it's worth having somebody explain that further to us, whether it's the chair of the regional school committee, which is Bob, or the superintendent.
Right. So they have had an engineer's report prepared, and it was presented by the engineer two weeks ago, I believe. And that report is available. If any of us wants to look at it, we can get a link to it. And I think, Carrie, if you could find that link and publish it to the committee, that would be useful to people who are curious about it.
Well, I just had one question. I actually won't be here for the school presentation, but how is it the parking lot costs $2 million?
That was a question that was asked by one of the board members, and the per space cost was something like $7,000 per space. That was considered to be a lot of money for parking space. So, you know, he did the quick back of the envelope, oh, we're paying this much money, and we're getting this many spaces due to the division, that's $7,000 a space. And so that was a concern that was raised by the committee member.
Yeah, so, you know, what I would, it strikes me as high, and so I wonder whether somebody should push back a little bit about whether you really need $2 million. I do agree, I personally agree that they needed parking all along, although we were told unequivocally at the meeting 2 years ago that there's more parking than ever. But I do believe we need it, and the superintendent has made a convincing presentation at the school committee about the need for it. But $2 million for a parking space, for a parking lot is,
Well, it's actually this is a combination of two pieces. They had a slate of options that included numerous that they decided against moving forward on. And this is really two pieces. One is paving the ring road that comes up and goes around past the BD, and also putting in some lighting because it's very dark at night and very, considered unsafe. So they want to do lighting, little curb replacements, and repaving that ring road. And the other piece of it is parking. And it's probably about a 50-50 split in terms of what those two projects are. They had a lot of discussion about whether to unlink them and have two warrant articles, because they don't want an intense conversation about parking to take down their desire to repave the ring road, which does need fresh tar.
that also sounds like, if it's $1 million to repave the ring, that sounds like a lot too. And I just know, I was on the Public Works Commission for 8 years.
Yep.
And it doesn't cost $1 million to, that'd be like a mile or something of road. So I don't understand that. So maybe they need additional help. Well, maybe even just go to Public Works and say, hey, what should it cost to build a parking lot and repave a half-mile ring road? And I just tell you, with Public Works, for example, each road that they repave, they look at all sorts of options. You can go from brand new road to just a mill and overlay, and the cost is huge. The difference is huge. So maybe they need some advice on that, because maybe they're getting a bid for digging up, ripping up the whole road, putting down new gravel, and then repaving the whole thing, versus just maybe they could solve their problem by just mill and overlay, which is a fraction.
But that would make sense for them to consult with Public Works before they, just.
I just had a question. I remember a meeting, the school committee meeting just before town meeting last year, the issue of lighting
Yes.
that didn't get done.
Yep.
was going to, whatever happened to
Still
that?
hasn't been done.
That's,
Yeah, that's part of this. I think.
What happened to the money?
Well, originally,
They were
it was
talking
like
about.
$15,000. They were gonna take some poles out of storage and put them on some stanchions that existed, and that hasn't been done. It just hasn't been done.
Is there money there?
They didn't
well,
go
no, they
forward with
didn't,
it.
they didn't move that article.
They,
Well, they-
they didn't ask for the money.
They,
No, but it had been appropriated
they,
to put lighting there.
I think what Andrew is referring to is the facilities manager for the high school, Brian Schlegel, said, I have these light poles in storage. I could take them out and we could put them, we could spend a little bit of money to make some concrete platforms to put them on.
Right.
And the wiring is already there, we could just do it.
Right.
And everybody goes, okay, then we don't need to move this article, we'll just do that. But they
Yeah.
haven't done that.
So they didn't move the
Is there
article.
money?
They didn't move
No.
the, I don't know about the
They
money.
didn't do either.
Okay.
I don't
They
know
didn't
about
move the
money,
article, and they didn't do the quick fix.
They did it quick fix.
And we don't know whether the money is there to do it if they went ahead with it.
My understanding of the money for that quick fix was, it was very short money. It was just a few concrete pilings or whatever.
Do you know why they didn't do that?
Wasn't that the money spent for the 2 signs?
No,
let's not-
issue, let's not get too sidetracked here.
Let's not get into the side.
Which signs? Bob would know.
Okay.
Does anyone know, do the lights work yet?
You're cute.
Let's move on.
Anyway, so the answer to your question is no. It's not been done.
I do think maybe we should have somebody explain this and what they've done to, to reduce the costs that they have, and how they got the $2 million.
Well, if you'd like to, so I've already made a note to ask the superintendent to address the high cost of parking, space per space. I'm sure that they're going to talk about this engineering report and the enumerated tasks that they're going to undertake. But if there are other things in particular that you'd like me
No,
to
no, I
suggest.
thought just have somebody address
Okay.
how they got their $2 million.
uh,
Where are we?
We just finished, yes, we're on 14, and
Oh, those signs have been elevated to notorious, that's how it was.
Every time I drive by, I look for the light.
I don't think we need to say much about it. This is the one that is being driven by this Municipal Modernization Act, right, Carrie, where we're creating.
Well, this is just the annual budget for each of these revolving funds. This will likely be on the consent agenda.
that's what I would guess. Right. I confess I don't understand Article 15.
So Article 15 is a request to establish a new revolving fund for,
The pre-K.
no, this is actually for rental of school property. It's not, the school is
right.
looking to establish 2 revolving funds.
Okay.
One for preschool tuition, which does not require town meeting action, only requires approval of the school committee, which I believe the school committee has already done.
Okay.
That will be established July 1st. This is a new revolving fund for just incidental rental of
Right.
school property, to set this money aside to pay for maintenance of, renting the gym for a small fee. That money goes in, and if,
Gotcha.
Oh, I thought it was also for the preschool.
no, they're two
That's a separate
separate
fund.
revolving funds.
Um,
That doesn't require.
In any case, either one of these funds, normally the money that comes in goes to the town
Yes.
budget, right? So this would take it away from the town budget.
Yes, and I've already accounted for the loss of those 2 revenue sources.
Okay, I think we've already done Article 16.
Yep.
So appropriation of funds for municipal capital projects under Article 17. Do we have any
I don't think we've talked about these before. have
No,
we?
I don't think so.
So I would assume the town manager will come and talk to us about these at some point.
We'll get him in here.
Okay.
That's probably when we'll get them, unless we invite him separately.
Well, I thought he was coming next week.
He's coming next week, so he can talk to you about it next week.
All right. Article 18.
Seems to be pursued that we're going to just establish a fund separately.
So we already have an OPEB trust fund. It predates Mass General Law, so we had special legislation to establish an OPEB trust fund. Mass General Law sort of caught up, and now we're looking to really reestablish our OPEB trust fund under the current Mass General Law.
So this is changing the existing trust fund to one that is now in accordance with.
To change it from the authorization from special legislation to Mass General Law.
I see.
So this could end up on this consent calendar.
It probably won't, because one of the elements of this is formally establishing a trustee, and I don't know, there might be some discussion about that.
Okay, Article 19, this is our sustainable growth rate article, and the article language is the language that Dean and I submitted. If you're just seeing it for the first time, you might want to read it, and
Great job by Tom and Dean.
I think this is good.
We got some feedback from Eric Van Loon, it's important to that.
So, at the select board meeting the other night, I think there was a request for some more detail on how an SGR would be determined
yes.
to support this.
Well, as I understand it, was to like improve the language of the descriptive boldface paragraph so that the SGR was better defined.
And Dean and I've already sent some draft language to Dean. We'll be discussing that in the next 24 hours and submitting a revised explanatory section.
Yeah, I just haven't had a chance to. John can attest.
Right.
He sent it to me through.
So I think the suggestion that Mike Lawson of the Select Board made to the effect that we would enhance our chances of having this go through smoothly and get enacted by a town meeting if we were to define the concept of sustainable growth rates. So we will do that. Any other questions or suggestions? Okay. Appropriation of funds, affordable housing development.
This is the first of three.
Yeah.
You know, that the task force that the select board had charged with coming up with a predictable, regular way of funding affordable housing. Remember Todd Benjamin was here discussing, remember Todd Benjamin was here?
Yes, indeed.
So they gave their report, the selectmen discussed it, and I guess this is the output, the three warrant articles that are coming forward. And the first one is asking for $500,000 from free cash. So I guess my first question on this would be, when I look at the hearing dates, why wouldn't an appropriation of free cash be under a finance committee hearing? I see them at the select board. Is that, I mean, I'm just wondering, I thought free cash was something that I thought free cash was something that the finance committee, yeah. So I'm wondering why?
So I can talk to the town manager's office and check in on that.
Yeah.
I think the intent is to take up all of the articles together at one hearing, not split them up between, one at the finance committee and then the two requests for special legislation.
Maybe they should all be at the finance committee. The three, do you want, should I keep going? Should I keep going? Talking about
Please,
this?
sure.
There's three. The first one is looking for, I believe, a one-time allocation of $500,000 of free cash to set that aside for affordable housing. The second one is asking that we institute a real estate transfer tax equal to 1% of the purchase price, which would be paid by the buyer. And the third one is a surcharge on building permits. And the specifics on this one are a little bit light right now, but I just read these. So the first, so we can go, I'd like to hear what people think about all three of them. I think the finance committee should have a strong opinion, or should have something to say on all three. And
Would you like to
Start? Okay. I think that free cash, I really do not support the use of free cash for affordable housing. I think one of the reasons why housing in Concord is not affordable is because our property taxes are so high. So free cash comes out of property tax. So it seems to me kind of crazy to be raising property tax by the use of free cash to go fund affordable housing. So I would not support the use of free cash for affordable housing. Not only that, but it's a one-time thing, and what the committee was looking for was something that was going to be a regular, predictable source.
Mary, you've been to many of these hearings.
Yeah.
Is the intention of this one-time thing to jumpstart the program?
Maybe. I never heard that articulated, but you're right, it could be to jumpstart it. But $500,000 doesn't really get you a lot in affordable housing. It might get you one unit. If you have a buy down, it gets you one unit. So as far as jumpstarting, I don't know. One unit doesn't do a lot.
It also could establish a precedent to just do that every year.
Yeah, that's my thoughts, but.
And the other two articles, how do you feel?
The second article is looking at, again, a 1% surcharge. To me, 1% is high. I'm a little bit more okay with this one, but I think 1% is high. That means the median value for a home in Concord right now is what, about $850,000?
Well, I think it's over $1 million.
No, the
Carrie,
median, I think, is 819.
What is the median?
The median.
19.
Yeah, I think it's a little over
It
$800,000.
is 819.
Oh,
So
yes.
that means that when you went to sell your house, the buyer would have to put 1% of that would be like $8,000 to the town to fund an affordable housing pot of money. And I would like to know exactly, if we said 1%, how big of a pot would that grow to be? Before I would be okay with 1%. 1% to me is high, actually.
How many homes do we think might turn over? in the town?
That's what I don't know. That's what I don't. So I don't know how much money we would be raising. So say we would raise $2 million a year, right? Well, then maybe we would tweak that to be 0.5% and only raise. That's what I'm wondering.
I bet we sell at least 100 homes a year.
Can we do the math?
That would be
We
800,000.
could figure this
on
out.
average.
What?
We could figure that out.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a tax. It's 1%, and depending upon how much we would raise, I would want to know if we would support 1% or something lower. The other thing that troubles me about this is that it's being paid for by the buyer. So the people in the room that are voting this tax are mostly sellers. So basically, we're voting a tax that we're not going to pay. It's going to be paid by the people coming into the town. So that's.
Well,
It's reflected in the sales price, though.
Yeah,
The sales price is gonna be, might be lower.
Maybe.
It has to get built into the sales price in some fashion.
Maybe, once the realtors, figure it out, right? That in order to close this deal, the buyer has to come up with another $8,000. That will impact the price, you're right. So anyway, that's my two thoughts about that. And then the building permit, again, I don't have the figures as far as how much money now this is basically a revision of the Article 49 that failed 2 years ago. But this is, I believe, a little bit more equitable in that it's not going to be charging for every addition and I guess I'd like to see more specifics here as far as exactly what the surcharge would be, when it would be charged, and what would be the amount of money that we would expect to raise.
So this is the one I had a problem with too, because there's no surcharge identified, and the phrase that may be increased from time to time, I thought was probably not worthy of being codified in a warrant article.
So,
Anyway, so those, I'm open to what other people think.
Mary or Carrie or anyone know why there's no explanatory language for Articles 21 or 22?
It just hadn't been received at the time that this draft was put together. It may still be outstanding at this time, but I'm not sure.
Just as a data point, I just looked up the number of home sales in Concord. So you got a lot of Trulia. The maximum was 97 in 2014. And it looks to me like they've got a graph, but it goes between 50 and 90.
And this
Homes.
is
Homes.
Number of homes.
annual?
And gross.
Annual sales.
That-
So you're trying to estimate if it's $8,000 times 50, it's 400,000. If it's 800,000 times 90, it's 720,000.
So in the committee's report, for 2017, they said the value of property sold was $329 million, and that would generate $3.3 million.
At 1%.
At
At
1%.
1%. So
That's a
a lot of those homes are
Not in the average.
not the average home scale.
Yeah. So if that were to continue, you'd be raising $3.3 million a year at a 1%.
Right, and I think when he was here, I asked him, now how much are you looking to raise? And he said 5 million. He wasn't looking to raise, 30 million. He was only looking to raise 5 million, so that would get him there pretty quickly. And then what happens?
Every year.
Did he say every year he wants
Yeah.
5 million?
Yeah, but
Yes.
that was, I think
Yeah.
that was one person's opinion.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to total
Mr.
5
Chairman,
million? It was 5 million per year.
Per year.
Yeah.
Per year.
That's like
Crazy.
10 affordable units per year. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
50 to 90 houses turnover in the town.
I have a procedural question. So, do you remember when we were going to have a special town meeting and this was going to be on it? Remember this was, at one point this year, we had a discussion about these same things, the affordable housing, and we were having a discussion whether we were going to recommend or not recommend. And on this one, we actually said we didn't think it was our job. So we didn't, at an earlier stage, we didn't say much about the affordable housing recommendations. And that was in this committee. Anybody else remember that?
I think I do remember it, but I don't think we had any numbers to work with at
Okay.
the time. That's my recollection. So
Okay.
we didn't really know what shape this was going to take.
Yeah, this is, now that there's a real warrant article, the finance committee has to come up, but I think we should come up with some recommendation, either approve, support it or no action.
But it doesn't affect the operating budget, so that's why I'm sort of pushing on it. And I think
Free
that's
cash
part of
does.
The first one
Use
does,
of
I
free cash
agree.
does.
I agree, and that one we clearly told them when they came here, that's a no-go. Continued use of that is not something we would support. But the other two,
You're right.
it's them raising revenue in a different way than property tax. So I'm not sure that one's in our world. So that's my question. I think that's some of the discussion we had earlier as well.
I don't remember that discussion, but it might have been one of the meetings I wasn't here, but I personally think we aren't limited to just the property tax. I think we give advice on financial issues, whether it's property tax or these other taxes that don't affect everybody, but still affect affordability in town, affects, the people that move into town. That's a financial issue.
I'm just trying to understand, because I know we have stuff that's in the guidelines and out of the guidelines, so there's plenty of pieces of the budget we don't get involved with.
Yeah.
So that's why
I struggle
I'm
too.
asking.
I struggle too, which is, what are we,
Right, what's our job?
what's our job? Exactly.
To advise town meeting. I think it's a very generic thing, financial matter.
So
Maybe we make our job what we think it should be, you know?
Yeah. As long as it's financial.
And if it's, and these are taxes, I mean, in another, you know, they're taxes.
Our guidelines process is constrained to those operating budgets, but our charter is to advise town meeting on financial matters.
Okay.
It's a broader charter.
So, Carrie, now that you've left the table, I have a question for you.
She went to get some more good news.
Regarding.
I did, I just got some really good news.
So,
Can you share it with us?
It's nothing you would be interested in. But it's really exciting.
you proposed as a rationale for why these three articles weren't coming before the Finance Committee's public hearing, that you thought the town manager wanted to do them all in one public hearing rather than break them up between two, which makes a lot of sense. But it does appear that an argument can be made that these do come under the, aside from the fact that they require some new legislation, they do pretty heavily affect matters about which the Finance Committee would usually advise town meeting. So I'm wondering if maybe they shouldn't be moved into our.
Well, I'll talk to you about
Okay,
that.
that's the way, all right, we'll just leave it that way. So, anything further on these three at this point?
Well, I guess we have the hearing and we hear what people have to say and answer the questions, right?
Right.
And after that, we would get together and decide our
Yes.
position at town meeting.
We're very interested in these.
We're good.
Okay. Yep,
That sounds good?
okay. So,
Is it subdivision of the road, and there's a house on it, you want to move the house, put it in the condo, and get access from the road.
I don't-
Allocated a lot for it.
I don't see that we have any advice on that. Does anybody disagree? Okay. Now, I'm sure we're going to be all over Article 24.
On our way to Article 25.
Yes.
I don't think we have anything to say about Article 26 either. Nor Article 27. Or Article 28. You guys stop me if you think I'm wrong.
No, you're wrong.
Well, just on 26,
Yes.
that's the appointment of the municipal office. And that's really subsumed in the town manager's budget. So, but it is a financial implication of that. But it really goes along with the town manager's budget. So I
Right.
think we need to separately address it. Which one do you this?
26?
This has come up before.
Right,
Did it,
yes.
did the town manager want to hire one? Or-
Yes, it was in his budget.
In
Yeah.
His initial budget, yes. And I guess it stayed in with even after the decreases to meet the guidelines, is that correct?
Yeah, does it
So,
have to be a bylaw? Or whatever it is, whatever they're saying? It's an article.
there is a position in the library budget, so it may be, I mean, this is a question to ask him about, but there's been some back and forth about whether or not the position will come out of the library budget and into the town clerk's budget, or if there would be an additional position.
This bylaw exists already, they're just amending it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether if you create a position by bylaw, that means you have to have the position. Like, let's say town manager says after a year that the archivist is not really necessary, or the new town manager decides that the archivist isn't necessary, they have a bylaw that requires it. say shall appoint.
It says shall. It's
So-
a directive.
So if you could just, you know,
Made it-
town manager has discretion to hire employees. Does he need a bylaw to?
Yeah, that's
require it?
my question.
Yeah, so that would be a good thing to bring up next week. I can let him know you want to talk about that.
I think, Tom, one of the issues is right now, it's I think it had to do with the select board was the one who was supposed to appoint the archivist. And that makes really no sense. It hasn't been followed. And so the change is going back to kind of reality, that it'll be the town manager and it's through the clerk's office. It's more the appointment and the management aspect of the bylaw.
So-
And I would say that the archivist is likely to be a permanent position that's going to require, you know, each year the position. There's a lot of catching up to do, but as far as the request for minutes and open meeting, that type of thing, we're getting more and more of that, and it's taking a lot of time.
So, Tom, are you saying that the current bylaw calls for the select board to appoint such a person?
That's right. And that hasn't been followed for some reason. Nobody knew that was really what the requirement was, because there hasn't been, I think there wasn't a knowledge of how the archivist, it was merged with another position, and nothing's happened with that. So I think what's happened is with the new town clerk, who's had the background in this field, looked at the situation, said there needs to be some changes. We need to, number one, get the job filled, and we need to get the work done, and there needs to be a different line of management.
Is it a records retention requirement for the state? Is that part of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe a compliance issue.
It's
that
a
they're trying to
compliance and
satisfy.
it's digitalizing a lot of these records that, and then there's gonna be a determination what are special records, which the library has a special division, and it's a fairly complicated and been a time-consuming on the part of town manager to try to work with the library trustees to get this sort of straightened out. But I don't think that there won't be sort of there won't be any addition to the budget beyond kind of deciding what the library is going to be required, that whether the special collections person, it comes under their payment rather than the town. So I don't think there'll be a budgetary increase, at least, you know, for a good while.
Okay. Article 27, I don't believe is of interest to us. Article 28, neither. 29, 30, 31.
Can I just go back to 29? So
Please.
if they were to say the moratorium was over, we would have the question of tax again? Is that?
No,
No?
we passed a bylaw that we can't have these establishments, so the moratorium bylaw that we've established is now pretty much null and void. This just takes it out of the,
Oh,
out of the word.
I get it.
Well, we already have voted to
Yeah.
put in a tax,
Yeah.
so we've already
Yeah,
taken care of that.
right, yeah, so,
Does anyone see any interest on our part in the, any of the zoning bylaw amendments? I don't.
we need to have something on fairs, bazaars, shows, cycles, and dances.
Uh,
I don't think there's a financial aspect.
Okay, then we get to Article 37, which will be of interest to us. And who is our current liaison with the CPC?
Yeah, we have not been able to attend the most recent meeting, so I don't have a good update.
Okay, all right. Generically, is there anything that you see as being worthy of investigation and questioning?
Yes. Not right now.
Okay. All right. To be determined. So I'm guessing that 38, 39, and 40 will be likely on the consent agenda. 41, 42, 43, 44.
Would 43 be on that? Is 43, why isn't 43 part of the town's capital expenditures? I was curious why that one pops up separately for 4 million.
Because it's part of an enterprise fund.
Okay. Oh, because
So
there's
there-
revenue associated with it
Yeah.
that's going to fund it? Okay.
Yeah, and they do that for these kind of things because they are long-term projects that, you know, the kind of thing you finance with that as opposed to operating.
And Carrie, do you have anything to say about Article 45?
No, there won't. I
There
don't
won't be-
expect
there won't be-
anything
okay, there
coming
won't
up
be.
under 45.
Okay, that's a big thing to say. Well, this strikes me as a record short warrant.
There's only one citizen warrant, and the average number, Chris checked, average number is 7. So that will reduce to a fairly substantial degree. I don't know how that will affect the determination as to what will be in the consent agenda, whether there may be a feeling that more items should be discussed more fully, where there may not be quite as, I don't see an enormous number of really major controversial
No.
even, so.
Is there any opportunity to add more citizen petitions? Or
No.
anybody
It's
from the
closed.
board or town?
It's
Closed.
It's closed.
Which one is the citizen?
Having to do with the.
Oh, the turf, of course, I should have mentioned.
I don't know whether there may be 1 or 2 additional items. There was, I had discussed with Chris, the state has passed now an Airbnb regulation where there would be a 6% tax, local tax, and that's not going to come into effect until, I believe, July 1st. But it seems to me that that's something that we might want to jump on and set up some type of a mechanism. I think he was checking to kind of see whether that was, timely or.
Right now, we don't allow Airbnb.
That's right, so,
So you're saying you would allow it to get the 6%?
Well, as I understand it, right now, there is still, you can get a special permit through one of the boards, but it's a fairly laborious process. And I don't know, I mean, you have to be licensed, you have to sign up if you're going to participate in the Airbnb.
Okay.
And I think if we were to have a warrant article and it were to pass, we would want to set up a mechanism so that citizens of Concord would be able to come in and the application process would be able to be expedited to some extent. I don't know, as I understand the law, it would only apply to those who lease or rent out their house for at least over 14 days in a calendar year. So it wouldn't apply if you're just doing it a weekend or something. But we don't know for sure how many people, but my guess is there are a certain number who would do it, for a month in the summer when they're away, and it might be an easy source of revenue.
I think it came up at the select board meeting, there were 50 advertised Airbnb properties in Concord, so.
Oh, so, wait, let me be clear, so are we saying, right now, we're discouraging Airbnb rentals in Concord, right?
I think we're making it's difficult for people.
So we're thinking
I
of
don't know if we're
changing that
pos-
because we see a revenue opportunity, or am I hearing it wrong?
No, I think that with the state law kind of coming into play, I don't know whether we could, we could ban it. We haven't banned it.
I see.
So people could, go ahead and do it. And the question is, if they do it and we're not in the line to get the 6% or have a mechanism set up for that, we could be losing revenue.
Good. Thank you.
So,
Carrie.
the town manager did ask me to look into this, and the town has already adopted Mass General Law, Chapter 64G, Section 3A, which is the rooms occupancy tax. And so the Airbnb is just authorized under that. So if we were to allow it, we would already be able to collect that revenue.
Well, as we're going to, the next item on the agenda is assigning responsibilities for a committee report, but we're going to do that after our public hearings. So at this point, any on the committee have any new business or old business you want to bring up? And citizen comment, we've had some. Ms. Reed.
Orland Reed again, 83 Woods End. Just a quick question on the sustainable growth rate. If you were to implement it this year, what would be that number? A calculation like that might be useful for the explanation for your warrant article.
Right. We've talked about various indexes that we might use, and the one that I believe we have shown the most favor to is the yield rate on the 10-year Treasury bill. And so we would likely pick the rate on the first day of February, that being the month in which we were going to have these hearings, as the proxy rate. And I haven't looked recently. John, have you looked to see what? If you may know.
But today it's under 3.
It's 277. The 10-year note rate is 277, I believe today.
So, now is that the rate or the yield? Is that
That's
it's
the yield.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, if we come in at our guideline spending, what would be the tax increase?
what would,
What would be the property tax increase if we come in at our guideline?
I don't think there would be a property tax increase because the assessed value of property in Concord last year was above 3%.
I thought, we always had a number that, represented the growth in the tax or something like that. It was always around 3%,
Yep.
between 3 and 5, I'd say. You're saying 0
Because the assessed value went up so high.
But when that's still, the assessed values go up, wouldn't that still?
Your taxes will go up because your house is now worth more.
your taxes will go up.
Your mill rate may
Right.
be flat or go down, but your taxes will go
Yeah, it
up.
wasn't the tax rate question, it was what is the overall
Yes.
raise in taxes
Yeah,
per household or whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So the mill rate stays the same because the assessed values went up, right? And the spending went up. Okay, but I'm asking how much will the average person, when they open their bill, how much will that go up year over year? And Carrie, I thought, don't we usually know that?
We usually state
Are
that.
you for fiscal 20?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
It's one of the numbers on our spreadsheet.
Yeah. So it's 2.77 would be the guideline, if we were using the guideline, right? The
You're
sustainable
using the
growth
sustainable rate.
Got it. So just a curiosity question. If we come in on our guideline spending, which we're close, right? We're very close to
I
our.
thought this was like 3.53 or something.
I just closed everything, so
Okay.
give me a second.
Yes, I think it was loading, I think it was on 3.3.
So the question that I asked with respect to determining the SGR and haven't gotten any feedback yet was whether that rate of tax increase, of median household tax bill increase, should bear any relationship to the prospect of going back to overrides, and whether that is one of the goals or one of the determining factors, one of the objectives of a sustainable growth rate.
In the avoidance of
The
overrides.
avoidance of going back to town overrides.
I view overrides as sort of they're sand in the gears, but they're not, it's like apples and oranges in some sense. It just means you have to ask the electorate to go to the polls and approve it, as opposed to go to a sort of easier money solution, which is going to town meeting and having them approve it. So it creates friction, but it's not significant in my view to the budgeting process and to setting guidelines or anything else.
Does the occurrence of an override or a sequence of overrides have any effect on our debt rating?
What if you turned it down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would.
I
Not,
think it's just like.
I actually looked at that, and towns that I think have done many more overrides, like Lexington and Wellesley and Newton, also have AAA credit ratings. So
As long as you keep approving. If you have a history of approving it, you're fine. But if you shoot it down,
I think there's a psychological barrier though, that
It is.
if people have to vote an override, I think they're more cognizant of spending. I
Right,
think
it
sometimes
makes you
people
aware.
have a feeling that, well, we haven't had an override, so we must have our spending under control. I've heard people say that, which isn't necessarily true. But I think if you have to go to an override, people will pay more attention.
also on certain issues, it's kind of easy to pack town, it's much easier to pack town meeting with and
Yes.
push through a vote than it is to do that on a town-wide basis.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Okay. We're done. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, please leave.
It's not 50 or 75, it's not.